Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is Ben Fisher, who is the CEO at Rodeo. Ben, welcome to our show.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome to have you on. Well, for maybe some listeners who aren't as familiar, tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, how you guys came to start Rodeo.
Sure. I'll say the long and the short of it is I started coding in like fifth grade. I was a nerd from a very young age. I grew up on a tree farm in Maine as an only child, and so basically I could play sports, and I mostly just had my computer. And so I got really interested in like the first .com boom when I was actually like probably I think in middle school at the time, and like learned HTML and coding, and I bought books by selling. I built like a strawberry business where I'd pick strawberries and sell them to restaurants. Fast forward, I continued focusing on programming and designing, and what you could build just really evolved over time to the point where I think around 2008 and 2009, we evolved from just like websites to actually being able to build software and web applications. And so since around that time, I've just been building B2B SaaS products. My first few businesses were not focused on e-commerce. But then I think about 3 years into that journey, I realized that, there's a lot of risks in building any company, one of which is, can you monetize it? And so when I was looking around, I was like, I've built really cool products, haven't necessarily figured out the business model. And then it kind of hit me. I was like, you know what? I'm going to focus specifically on building tools that help e-commerce entrepreneurs make more money. And that's been like my focus ever since. And so we're currently working on Rodeo, but what led me to this business was a company I started before this, which was called CartHook, where we sort of introduced this idea of being able to create sales funnels, e-commerce sales funnels on Shopify. At the time, a lot of marketers were going from selling like info products on ClickFunnels, and a lot of those strategies that like they could employ around post-purchase upsells simply weren't possible. Yet now they wanted to sell physical products because drop shipping was finally possible, and they had a much larger addressable audience of people who want to buy physical goods versus digital products. And so through building CartHook over the course of several years, I got to know a lot of subscription brands and really kind of intimately got to work with them around like an understanding like what are their biggest challenges around subscription and scaling their subscription business, and frankly how subscription is one powerful component to any e-commerce business, but like there's some really big differences I would say in we'll call it subscriptions in e-commerce versus B2B subscription. Right? Like this idea in B2B SaaS, you have this idea that like, oh, it's truly compounding, it's truly recurring revenue. Whereas in physical products, not a lot of people will talk about this, but it's critical to be able to skip, critical to be able to reschedule. It's not actually recurring. And that's because consumption doesn't always like match, we'll call it like the
Equal
order
30
cadence.
days every time. Yeah, right.
And it's impossible too, because it's like lifestyle and stuff. And so
Yeah.
at any rate, that specifically was a problem that I got really sort of interested in and nerded out on, was focusing around specifically how do you, in situations where products either aren't like a perfect subscription product, like it's not a medication that you take every day, how do you still create a great consumer experience? And, how do you avoid that problem of, sending product when someone doesn't need it, because that leads to churn. And then on the other side of it too, is you have people who just don't want to subscribe for whatever reason. How do you help a brand still drive repeat purchases, drive like subscription, like revenue from customers who love your product, but don't want to subscribe? Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely
Okay.
does. And I think that you're highlighting there one of the very fundamental differences between digital and physical subscriptions, right? Is, a digital subscription by nature is it's there all the time. It's available to you. You're going to use it or not use it, but I can bill you on a very fixed interval because that's the arrangement we had from the beginning. But with physical goods, because of consumption and just to your point, lifestyle, life events, things like that, that's going to vary. I subscribe to subscription dog food, and I've gotten to a place where it's a good interval, but it didn't start there. Like I had to figure out what my dog wanted and how much, and I was playing with dates at the beginning, but it was honestly because of that flexibility that they gave me in the beginning. That's what's kept me around because I know I can easily adjust it and make changes and based upon consumption. But these are some challenges that not every subscription business has to deal with, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's, um, yeah, and some products are more difficult than others, right? Like, at least I would say with like most pet food, your pet probably eats fairly consistently, but like let's say it's coffee or food or something that humans are consuming. You're not having the exact same portion every single day. You might have people over. And so we see it over and over again. And then, you add on top of that the fact that um I think 7 years ago, there was like, let's say there was like 5% of brands on the internet were offering subscriptions. As of this year, 75% of direct to consumer e-commerce brands have a subscription offering. So you would go from a place where, people would self-select and subscribe. And so their LTV was, they, I think that there was a higher confidence that that person would be a longtime subscriber, 5 years ago than today when I don't say every, but most brands are optimizing for acquiring subscribers when in fact, the data shows us the average person, so 30% of people will subscribe to a product. And on average, like the typical band is a person will have 2 to 2.5 brand subscriptions at one time. And a big piece of that is like, because the average order value of a physical product is much higher than like, a digital product like Netflix. You're not buying like a food or beverage for $5.99 a month. It's oftentimes like $25 or so. And so like for a household, they typically will only have two. And so when you look at it and you think about it from the consumer perspective, it's like, as a person, I'm only going to subscribe to a couple things in parallel. And so, unless a brand is at the top of my priority, like I'm just not going to subscribe. And so that I think has been one of the wrenches that I've seen thrown into the mix in the last couple of years is just with the success of the model. Um, you know, it can be difficult for people to subscribe and then stay subscribed.
Do you think that's because of consumer apprehension or just feeling like, hey, if I have 5, 10 subscriptions, I'm probably overspending, even though they might be going to the grocery store or Walmart or whatever and getting those same products, spending the same amount, but there's this mental block of that's too much.
I mean, I think it's a couple things. I think it's certainly mental overload. I think it's one thing to manage a couple subscriptions, just as it's one thing to juggle one or two balls. But as we all know, like in your life, the last thing I want to be thinking about is, man, I have like 7 different things I have on that are $25 each that I'm subscribed to. Some are on a 3-month interval, some are on a 6-month. I'm not necessarily catching every email. I'm not catching every SMS. And so I think part of it is just wanting more control over getting the product. And I think for any of us, like I actually had an experience a few months ago where I didn't see the notification, but I received an entire family size delivery of paper towels at my apartment. And I live in New York City. I had no shelf space. And so I'm not joking. I filled my entire freezer up with paper towels. And I just now took out the last paper towel. And so, it's one of those stories where it's like, I had looked into returning them, but I would have had to walk 25 minutes to an Amazon locker. And I'm like, these are paper towels. It was $25 or something, but like, anyways, but that is the number one reason too that people cancel. And I think again, it's, that is a symptom of, and one of the sort of downsides of subscriptions is that like they're great when they're convenient, but like the more you add into it, the more complex the system is, the more things you're having to paying attention to. And at a certain point, it's just like, I actually, as a consumer, all I want is your product when I need it. I don't want to create more work for myself. And so anyways, I nerd out on sort of this, like we'll call it like the consumer psychology piece of it. Cause I talk to people all the time and ask them, what subscriptions do you have? Like, what was your favorite? What do you hate? And, anyways, that's led to some like really interesting, I'd say like insights on both the brand side and the consumer side. Cause I ask founders of subscription brands all the time, like, what subscriptions do you have? And more than half of them have zero, which is always fascinating to me,
Yeah, it is. It really is.
right?
That should tell you something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Huh. Well, so I've been in a subscription for a really long time. Before doing this, I worked for a company that did membership clubs and insurance and things like that all over the world. And we actually defined our billing. We called the process NegOpt for negative option because these were all products 100% across the board. Where once you signed up, until you told us to stop, we were going to bill you forever for that product, right? Or we couldn't bill you for some odd reason. Um, and I think kind of what you guys support it is more of that positive option where yes, you can do set the replenishment. I don't even have to take action. You're going to keep sending it to me. And there are consumers that want that, especially for certain products. But this other type of subscription is we have an ongoing relationship, but the frequency and the means by which we continue to transact is consumer controls, not merchant control, right? Do you think that's kind of the way to think about it?
yeah. And I think that like, so, and I'll say, like, my original solution for this was I used calendar reminders. I've now found other people who do this exact same thing. So, like, I'm not the only freak. But what I would do is, if there were products that I bought consistently, I'd create a calendar reminder, like, for every 30 days. I'd have a link to the PDP page, like the product page, that if I needed the product that day, I'd click on it, I'd go and I'd buy it. If I didn't, I'd move the reminder a few days.
Okay.
Right. So we created
Yeah.
that tech. And that
Yep.
was like, that's really the thesis of it, is like similar to, like, the other analogy I give is, like, growing up as a kid, my parents would often have pizza on Fridays. But if you were to ask my parents to subscribe to pizza every Friday, they would say no, because, like, what if we don't want pizza this week? But if instead you sent my mom or my dad a text message or email on Friday afternoon saying, do you want pizza tonight? 9 times out of 10, they'd
They're
probably
going to
say
click it.
yes. And
Right.
that's the
Right.
thesis. Is like, for people, like,
Okay.
for folks who don't want to subscribe, there's still a lot of those people who will still
Yeah.
behave in a subscription-like behavior. They just don't want the commitment.
Yeah, that
So,
that that is a great analogy right there. And I think it kind of sums up consumer mentality these days,
yeah,
which is I want convenience. I want everything associated with making my life easier. But, and there's an important but here, I still want choice. I still want flexibility,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's kind of what that describes.
yeah. And what I think, where it gets even more interesting too, is, like, it varies a bit by generation, right? So what you'll see is, like, with baby boomers, it's much more around convenience. I think I always get confused now with the different generations. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
I can't
technically a
even keep up.
I'm called, like, a bridge millennial, I think. I was
Okay.
born in '85, but, like, my like, my people, apparently, like, what they care a lot about um is I'm gonna say, like, it's curation is a big piece of it. Like, higher quality product curation matters. For
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
kids who are younger than me, sustainability and, like, eco-friendly is a big piece of it. But, like, yeah, there are all these sort of different, like, areas within why, like, what are the reasons or the motivations to subscribe. Like, I would say the underpinning for all of it is a certain level of convenience. Like, this idea of set it and forget it. Like, most of us in the world are trying to get stuff off our plate. And so if you can, combine convenience with whatever else that other thing is, if you need another thing, then that's great. And for some people, convenience is just enough of it. It's like, as long as I don't have to think about this, I will rest easier. Um,
Yeah, well, and again, going back to your earlier point, that is product dependent, right? If
yes.
there's
Yeah.
things like my dog food that I know I'm going to need, and I've worked out the cadence, just bring it to me. In fact, just showed up on my doorstep a little while ago. Um, but for other things, even something as simple as like shampoo or something like that, things like that can vary for a whole bunch of different reasons. But
Oh, yeah.
I think as long as you're giving customers easy ways to make adjustments, they're going to be less apprehensive, right, about quote unquote subscribing as long as they can, make those changes.
Yeah. I will say, I mean, like, what you said is I mean, that's a great thing to point out. And there's also an enormous amount of data that indicates that people who make modifications to their orders actually have a higher likelihood to continue with their subscription. So the ability
Mhm.
and flexibility is really important around rescheduling and swapping. which goes into a few things. I think one of which is it highlights well, or I think the last stat I saw is around 30% of people with a subscription swap the product. And what a lot of this like highlights is that people aren't actually subscribing to products; they're really subscribing to brands.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Mm-hmm.
what product you want might vary, but at the end of the day, it's not about an individual product. It's about, like if this company has a few things, I'm subscribing to the brand.
Yeah.
Um, and that I said the other thing you had reminded me of was and this is relevant to your world around like digital products. Is I don't know, have you been following the legislation that's been coming up around all the laws around like click to cancel? Another
Yeah.
one is around specifically, there's a new bill that's going through, I believe, the Senate that will completely change how you can approach win back campaigns, where you will not be able to if someone's in the process of canceling or trying to cancel, you can't present them with rebuttals unless
Mm-hmm.
they first say, I'm willing to accept or
Right.
I'm willing to be presented with rebuttals, essentially.
They have to opt into the rebuttal, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at it, that's the way that most subscription brands like retain the customers that like are unhappy. Obviously, certainly if you're trying to proactively have a great experience, but if we're being
Yeah.
honest, most people do it at that moment of the person canceling where they offer a discount, they offer a gift. Like those strategies that have been sort of, I would say, like relied upon are likely to go away.
There's a lot of argument and debate about whether those are even effective anymore anyway. And some of that's driven by plenty of brands offering products and selling them at dramatically different prices or getting the reputation for just complain, they'll cut it in half or something like that. And so that kind of bred a behavior where, yeah, I'll just go through the cancel flow here and see if I can get a better price or something like that, at least in some cases. But you have plenty of customers that just want to cancel, right? For whatever reason, they legitimately just want to cancel. And the harder you make that, well, the more frustrated they get and the higher likelihood of chargebacks, right?
100%. And it's really important that it is like as consumers, like that we have control and that it's not like, I think the most egregious ones are when they want you to call them, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like that to me is just insane.
Yep. Uh-huh. This just happened to me yesterday with a very large cable company that shall not be named, but everybody knows exactly who they are, where it was just this dread of knowing I was going to have to call to cancel something and expecting to go through the worst possible experience. And I will say, while it wasn't great, I at least got through it, and they let me cancel at least a portion of our service, and that I guess that's a small improvement, but that goes a long way. But unfortunately, for gyms and all kinds of traditional subscription companies that just made it so hard to
Oh my
cancel
gosh.
or get your money back or even, dispute an illegitimate charge or whatever, that reputation has carried forward. And now consumers, especially when they're engaging with a new brand that they don't know or don't know much about, there's this natural apprehension of, are they going to let me out of this right now? Which
Mhm.
unfortunately hurts everybody's conversion, right?
And that I would say is another one of the headwinds that is going to continue to affect. It is affecting, and it will become increasingly impactful around just like impact on getting people acquiring subscribers. Is people have bad subscription experiences that have nothing to do with your brand,
Mm-hmm.
but because of that, it's like they
Mm-hmm.
call it post-traumatic subscription syndrome or
It
something,
is.
right? Like
It
where
is.
it's just
Yeah.
like I just don't want to deal with it, and you're competing against Amazon where you order anything, it shows up in two
Yeah.
days. Now you
Yep.
still have that same issue that for me as a consumer, like I don't want to have to remember to buy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which again for me goes back to like our strategic decisions around like how we're thinking about the repeat buying problem from like a design perspective. Like it's not necessarily about AI. It's not necessarily about like any individual thing. It's about trying to approach things from the perspective of a consumer around like what's important to the consumer and how do you just make it easy. Because at the end of the day, if you make it easy for me to buy when I want your product at those
Uh-huh.
moments, I'm extremely like open to buying. I'm likely open to like an upsell or a cross sell, right? And there are these moments in every customer journey that like it's important for a brand to have the tools to be able to like present an offer at the right time.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Well, speaking of Amazon there, obviously there's subscribe and save. I can pick a product to determine my frequency and have them send it to me. But, talk to a lot of subscription companies that have, their niche that still does compete with something that's probably being sold on Amazon. And it seems like the overarching theme of why they're successful is because they can frequently build communities around their product.
Mhm.
Right? Maybe it's got some environmental angle to it or sustainability, whatever the case might be, but they can build that around something that Amazon just can or just doesn't focus on, right? They're just about pushing product. Do you see that as the key to success, or what are some other ways you can differentiate from or kind of combat that Amazon subscribe and save?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So going back to like what some of the data says is, especially let's say like millennials and I guess is it Gen Z, who I think is right below me,
Mhm.
and I don't know what the one below that is. Like
Why is it now or something
children.
like that? Yeah, basically.
Gen AI. I don't know. That'll be like the people who are just born.
Mhm.
But it's there are brands who'll say, or there are consumers have said they're willing to pay more to buy directly from a brand if they feel like they're able to get a higher quality product directly through that brand, or there's some element of curation. I think Amazon, I'm not directly answering your question, but I think this sort of encapsulates how, like, what I'm hearing from the brands that I work with. And for context, most of my circle of friends work with or run D2C brands that are in the range of like 10 to around 150 to $200 million a year in revenue. So we're talking about folks who, they've done D2C well. And part of what I ask them is like, how do you approach or even think about Amazon and like retail, et cetera? I think the years ago, I don't know how long ago it was, but maybe it was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I feel like with COVID, everything feels like
Oh
it's a
yeah,
time warp.
yeah, it is.
There was a lot of brands who were like, I'm just going to focus on, especially digitally native brands, were like, I'm just going to focus on D2C channel. And then with the change around like Facebook and like, you know, Apple, iOS tracking and like all the things that have changed around attribution and stuff like that, there isn't a single sophisticated brand that I know of that has not been like embracing some element of Amazon in their mix. Retail in particular, they've acknowledged as like enormously important. Like, I don't know anyone who's just focusing on D2C or even saying that that's a winning strategy, to the point where they're like, the only way for us to be successful is to now extend into these other pieces. And I think some of the reasoning around the Amazon is, it's not, if someone buys habitually from Amazon, unless you can match like 2-day free shipping and all that other stuff, like, you're better off having your product in Amazon for them to buy when they want to buy than for
Mhm,
them to buy from your competitor. Right.
mhm, that
I'd say that's one school of thought.
mhm,
Um, Now, not everything you're buying is on Amazon. Like, there are certain brands I haven't even checked to see if they're on Amazon. I buy them directly through their site because they've made it easy for me, especially to manage
mhm,
the subscriptions. I think the things that I've seen them be able to do by selling directly as opposed to through like an Amazon is, as you mentioned, community is one of them. Digital guides. Like, one thing we did early with a product, actually, with one of the brands that we work with, um, when we first had worked with them, they had products in Amazon, but what they introduced was this idea that they're only basically every month they'd incorporate a, we'll call it like a different blend of coffee that was essentially a drop. It would only exist for that month. There was a very limited quantity of it, and you had to be a subscriber in order to even buy that product. So that there were products on their store that you couldn't even buy on Amazon. So if you wanted just like their hero product, you could buy that on Amazon. But if you wanted any of like sort of like their seasonal
uh,
products or things
okay,
that are special and they're dropping, then
okay,
you buy it direct. And again, that
okay,
goes back to like, how are you be able to provide as a brand like value beyond just
yeah.
more product?
Well, that right there is pretty interesting because it's almost using Amazon for the marketplace value, right? To
Hmm.
find and at least get a sample of your brand and then bringing them across, right? Is that kind of their strategy?
Yeah, I think it is. It's ultimately about meeting people where they're shopping and recognizing you're not going to change consumer behavior. and that you're better off having more customers, even if you don't own all of them directly. Um, and again, I'm not an e-commerce operator myself. That is not my wheelhouse. I am more like, these are questions that I ask a lot of people because I'm trying to understand what their mindset is. And
Yeah.
so these are some of the lessons and takeaways I guess have gleaned from that.
Hmm.
And it makes sense, right? Like, I know one brand that, in spite of all the work they've done, most of their money comes through Amazon. And I know the entrepreneur resented it for a long time, but at a certain point was like, man, I need to like stop fighting this and just kind of accept it and find ways to be successful. Um, and they have. But yeah, it's a scary idea of being, like, all the things that can happen in that Amazon ecosystem, or between whether it's being copied by someone else or like
Right.
whatever. So
Well, I guess take a giant step back. You were talking about starting Carthook first. What got you from that to starting Rodeo? And are you still involved with Carthook, or you've moved on to focusing on Rodeo?
yeah, well, so we sold Cart Hook, I think about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
I'd left the day to day probably 4 years ago. Um, so we'd started Cart Hook, I think probably like 9 years ago. And it started off actually as it, it started off as abandoned cart app that would email you if you abandoned a shopping cart, and they're like, "Oh, this is what's in your cart, and this is what's left." At the time, it was like a brand new concept. No one was doing it. Like, ad retargeting was popular, but very few companies were doing abandoned cart. And we built like a special innovation that would detect once someone had typed in their email address. They didn't actually have to submit the form for us to grab their email. We were able to
Right.
grab their email as soon as it was typed, and they had like tabbed out of the field.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so we had like a really effective tool there. Shopify was like a third integration. And while we were in Shopify, when we were talking to lots of Shopify merchants, that's when we kind of came across a lot of these like high growth D2C brands who were experimenting with new business models, and specifically ways of just like, how do we drive increased AOV, drive repeat purchases? And so subscriptions were a model that just had come out, and were being done by like some of these early brands. Um, and so with our product, so we shifted our entire business from like the abandoned cart app into, at the time, was a one-page checkout with post-purchase upsells. And you could create sales funnels from your ads that would go to this one-page checkout. So
Okay.
the value there being is that someone clicks an ad, they're going to a landing page with copy that corresponds to the ad they clicked, as opposed to just like a general landing page
Yeah.
that is being used by 15 different ads that might be highlighting different benefits. And so what you saw there was, it was just a really effective sales funnel to be able to guide someone from an ad to purchase. And then once they purchase, they could add additional products to their order without re-entering their credit card information.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, a lot of those brands also did subscriptions. And so that was when I got really interested in the subscription space and like talking to those brands. And so when I left the day to day of Carthook, I consulted as a fractional CTO to subscription brands, focusing specifically on like, what are the different strategies and techniques that like I can help other brands on to help them scale their business.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, how have you guys then grown that product? Because what even brands expect from subscriptions, billings, and payments has evolved quite a lot, as have rules and regulations, as we already kind of touched on a little bit. So how has that product changed? I know it's not that old yet, but how have you guys evolved it?
Yeah, so Shopify introduced these APIs about a little over 2 years ago. And so we're about 2 years old with Rodeo. And there's no doubt, in 2 years, there's like Cambria explosion of apps, right? And I'd say, as a platform, Shopify's continue to extend their surface area. There's now like tons of new functionality that you can do, of ways to do like order bumps on checkout pages, and like, it's a lot to keep up with.
Sure.
Ultimately, like, our mission has always been from day one, focusing on what are the ways to help brands drive repeat purchases in a way that what we describe as consumer centric, meaning it's not just about what the brand wants. It's really recognizing what is it that consumers want and need, and what is a great experience that will facilitate that transaction. Um, And so, I mean, I guess I don't know if there was a specific question around how we've managed or navigated that growth. Because yeah, you're right. Like I would say the amount of functionality that any subscription platform has today versus what existed 10 months ago is dramatically different, in part because there are so many, like I'd say, entrepreneurs who've gone out there trying to take their own approach to solving, we'll call it solving or enabling subscriptions. And so you have a lot of different models. And, I think that goes back to it being really important to niche down on what are the use cases and workflows that certain types of brands are trying to accomplish, because you can't possibly do all of them. Like Build a Box is a great example, where Build a Box is a really popular model, especially around food and like meal delivery.
Mhm.
That involves so much different like functionality and components and logic, including like billing windows and shipping windows that, if you're a brand that's just selling like a non-perishable product, not relevant. And
Right.
so for us, it's really been just continuing to make sure that we are learning from our customers and making sure that we're, I guess, understanding what part of the ecosystem we can sort of carve out to really be
Uh-huh.
successful. Which I
Yeah.
think is part of the entrepreneurial journey, whether you're selling software or an e-commerce brand yourself. Like you're not gonna be the only coffee company, and so it's figuring out what is it that you can bring to the table that will get people to want to buy from you, even if there are other options.
Right. So you guys manage the subscription. Do you manage the payments as well, including declines?
So the payments are all facilitated through Shopify, and
Okay.
so what
Y-
Shopify did when they created these APIs was all the payment processing is processed through Shopify. And actually, one important thing to know about the Shopify ecosystem is that I think it's about like 60% of Shopify's revenue is from payment processing.
I
And so
saw that.
payment processing and the checkout are core to Shopify's business. That's where a lot of their leverage is, right? The checkout page, if your checkout page is down, your store is not making money. And
Mhm.
so we still have to manage retries, and like we have tools around dunning and stuff like that. But
Okay.
the actual payment processor, like even if you're using a third party gateway like authorize.net or
Mhm.
Aiden or whatever, it's still through Shopify's APIs.
Okay.
Even if the payment itself is not being transacted directly through Shopify.
Does that mean the customer's account information is in Shopify's vault that then
Yes.
they're routing it to whatever? Okay. Makes
Typically,
sense.
yeah, like 9
Yeah.
times out of 10, there can be some exception or some edge cases there, but by and large, the answer is yes. That way it's centralized within the Shopify store.
But you guys are handling all right, this payment, we tried to send out this payment, it came back, it was unsuccessful. What do you guys do there? Do you reach out to the customer? How do you optimize collecting that payment from the consumer?
We do it through 2 ways, one of which is we integrate with Klaviyo, and so a lot of even in the subscription flow as well as, like, repeat buying flow, like, we trigger events that are sent to Klaviyo that can get some that are eith that essentially can get someone to update their credit card if their credit card failed. It's the same mechanic that notify someone of an upcoming subscription. And even in that email, we say, hey, you still have time to add a few more things to your order. So we have
It
the
is.
ability to click one button and it gets added to their upcoming order. Um, so integrations are a key part of that. If you want to get really sophisticated, we integrate with a product called Churn Buster that does like very advanced dunning flows. And I think they don't just work in e-commerce. I believe they integrate with a bunch of other platforms as well beyond just Shopify.
Well, last question for you here, Ben. As you've not just with Rodeo, but perhaps with Cart Hook as well, any specific lessons learned along the way, where both good and bad, where maybe you were like, gosh, we really should have done something different here, or I'm really glad we made that decision and here was why.
Yeah, I mean, a few. I think, well, we'll start on the positives. I think
Yeah.
from the very beginning, and this is kind of the way I'll say through things that have worked, through successes and failures, like I've kind of whittled down like certain criteria around any sort of business opportunity that I personally am not only interested in pursuing, but I think like I might have an unfair advantage in doing it. That's what I'm always looking for is like, what's my unfair advantage? Like, what do I know about this? And, that what can I bring to the table that others can't? But a part of that comes down to focusing on brands who make money, right? So especially in the Shopify ecosystem, like Shopify is known for being the place where people could start with like no revenue and then grow their business.
Mhm.
what we learned with CardHook was that brands that are, we'll call it, doing less than $1 million a year, they're still trying to figure out if they have a business. And that first million, again, as an entrepreneur, I sympathize. It's really difficult to go from 0 to 1, right? But at that point, you're oftentimes throwing stuff against the wall, just trying to figure out, what the hell you're doing. I am most helpful and enjoy. I enjoy. I am most helpful, and I can have the most amount of impact with brands who have figured out at least that they have a product that people like and they have distribution. What I can help them with is figure out how to scale it and deal with a lot of like the technical challenges that'll come with that, both from like my experience in having worked with a lot of brands and my partner's experience of having worked with a lot of brands, on both the engineering side as well as on the entrepreneur side. That's where we can really be helpful, is look around corners and say, all right, you're currently at $3 million a year recurring revenue. Here's just like this much a subscription. You have enough volume at this point where it actually really makes sense to make sure that you're doing these sort of, we'll call it like flows, to help get like solicit feedback from customers and check in, and you could call it like customer satisfaction scores and stuff like that. Oftentimes on the technical side, it's saying, hey, these are the ways we know that we can bend the platform to accomplish the workflow you're trying to accomplish. So for example, as brands get more sophisticated, one thing we've seen is they want to be able to create what's almost like workflows where, let's say someone has repeatedly bought the same product. One is send them an offering to sell them like basically 3 months worth of that product. And so you end up creating like, we've enabled like workflows where it's like enabling someone to swap out the product they had for a larger version of it, but also changing the interval that it's being sent, right? So you're changing from a monthly subscription of a specific household wipe to, I'm going to send you 3 months of the household wipe with the previous scent that I had pre-selected.
Okay.
Right. Like it's things like that where it's ultimately at the end of the day, what all these brands are trying to do is figure out, how can I reduce my shipping costs? How can I increase my contribution margin? How can I increase AOV, LTV, and repeat purchase rates? And the way that you do that is by figuring out things that are working and and look at your data and your user behavior and figure out, well, what can we do that might be unique to our business, but works in other models? And so that's what we're best at, is working with a brand and basically looking at it and be like, yes, we're a technology provider. We are not an agency. But we've done this so many times and worked with so many brands that we've created recipes that can be implemented to help sort of push these different levers that will help a brand scale profitably.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think it absolutely does. I think the key in what you just said there, a consumer, if you're offering both products, can actually figure out what you just said on their own if they really want to, right? Oh, I can get this bigger one. It's a 3-month supply. Let me cancel this one, add this, and go through all of those steps. But the key, if you want to get the consumer there, is to make that as frictionless as you possibly can, to be like, hey, we can save you a few bucks if you just click here and we'll automatically swap this for that, right? That's where that really is magical.
Exactly. And you can't do any of those things out of the box, right? So ultimately what it comes down to is, again, put on your engineering hat. It's like reverse engineering. Okay, like there's these different sort of workflows and formulas that are recipes that make sense because they, especially if, like with a lot of products, like going back to what's really interesting is like with that home goods product, it has water in it. So it's really heavy to ship. So if they can sell more of that in bulk, they save an enormous amount of money on shipping. And I'd say appropriately, they're also helping the environment because there's a lot less waste. But it's like a win-win where, again, you don't want it to, like there's that great book, Don't Make Me Think. I don't know if you've read it, but it's about product design. It's like one of the old like Bibles in like the design world. And the whole thing is around like, don't make me think, guide me to what's best for me, and tell me what the benefits are. But then I don't want to think and figure out like all the math. I just want you to do it for me.
Yeah. Good principle there for sure.
Yeah.
And I guess the flip side of that question was, any lesson along the way, anything that you've done or decision that was made, they were like, wish I could go back and undo that one.
I think with like most of us, I've regretted not making faster decisions, even when they're really hard. And I think that's something that I've certainly worked on my entire life. Right. And I would say I'm comparatively much better at it today than I have in the past, but when I look back on decisions that were hard, but like I knew in my gut were right, and I made them within like the business, they didn't always work out. But I think like one tendency that I even get into is coming from the engineering side, and my partner's an engineer. Is like we've always had to try to figure out how to offset our like engineering and like creative side. Not both of those are great qualities, but execution is critical. And I would say that there have been periods in my professional career where I'd say my potential was so much better than my result, my output. And
Mm.
oftentimes, like the things that from the feedback I've gotten from people I work with, because I'm always asking, like, and pushing our team on, like, why did this turn out so badly, right? Like, we're much better than this. And oftentimes, it's a lack of like really scaling down, like the focus. It's
Mm.
to making sure that like really identifying what's the one thing that we can execute on really well,
Yeah.
and making sure that we stick to that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes down to like you don't
Mm.
the way to improve the output is to improve the inputs. But as I'd say a restless entrepreneur, I spend a lot of time being like, why is this taking so freaking long? And and
I
now
think
even you
every
have
entrepreneur listening to this
yeah.
has had that thought probably today.
And now we have these competing philosophies that, I think if we were to have like a conversation about it, they don't really directly contradict each other, but like it used to be like, go fast, like, yeah, go fast and break, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
like, launch a first version of stuff. Now though, like consumer sentiment has changed,
Yeah.
right? Like you
Yeah.
have much more polished products, and especially if you're competing against really well-financed companies, like I think there are still certain circumstances where, like, yeah, like if you're solving a real problem, it doesn't really matter necessarily how good looks. But if you're solving a real problem, you are going to very quickly, if you have any success, be competed against very quickly by people who will be building a great version of that.
Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
finding that balance um,
Yeah.
is tough, and it's something I'm
Yeah.
always actively trying to improve at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all of the tools and the ecosystem that we've all built together really has made speed to market a hell of a lot faster. So to
Yeah,
take a successful idea and replicate it, or even take it and make it better, unless you're moving the ball down the field as well, you're going to get passed.
yeah, 100%. And, it's with AI and everything, like it's only going to become increasingly like it's easier. I think it's easy to create pretty things, which don't necessarily mean you're building a good product. But, I think that the variation of minimum viable product I hear is like, what's the minimum valuable product? Again, a lot of this is semantics, but ultimately it's about what's the need and what's the value that satisfies that need, and how many people need that need, and then how do you get the people? Can you get enough of those people together who need that? And I think that's the other piece too. Is for me, I'm not a marketer by trade, and so several of my products have succeeded in part because people loved the product and enabled them to do something that they could not previously do, and they got so excited that they told people.
Yeah.
Figuring out how to
Yep.
intentionally drive marketing, and like I'm actively trying. If anyone's listening, like if they're a really talented marketer, like I just want to be your friend. Like I'm happy to give whatever advice that I and experience I can impart, but like I just love understanding and learning from other marketers, or learning from marketers, because distribution, that's one of the key things I learned from in my companies is like distribution matters enormously. Um,
Yep. It's really the
what about
key. If you
you?
can
What have you learned?
when you were saying, how to make decisions faster, that one, of course, resonated with me. And we've all heard this before, which is kind of now fire fast or hire fast, fire fast. And there's I'm not advocating for fast necessarily, but quicker there's a lot of value with that. And one thing about hiring that I heard was, we've all been folded interviews, right? Where somebody said all the right things, the paper looked good, and then you got them in the door weeks or months later, and we're like, wait a minute, this is not what I thought.
Yeah.
And the reason people don't fire is it's ego driven. It's like that admits I was wrong, that I didn't see something that I probably should have seen, and ultimately that's everybody can be fooled. Anybody can put something on a resume or say something in an interview that sounds good, but it's always about where the rubber meets the road and can they do the job. So suck it up accept that, this isn't a hit to your ego, and just do what you got to do. And that's my biggest lesson learned along the way, I would say.
No, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, I would think part of it, at least for me, I'm sure ego is a piece of it, but it's also just like being like, I thought I just solved this problem. I don't want to have to go back and go through the
Yeah.
process of refilling it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you found any great like books on this, but like there's a great book called Smart. I'll send you the link, included in the show notes. But it's one of the best books I've read around hiring and basically creating
Okay.
objective scorecards. I actually think the book's called Who.
Okay.
um, I'll send you the link one way or
All
another.
right. Well, we'll get it in the notes for sure.
But no, I completely agree with you on that. It's hard.
Yeah. It is. It is. It's almost one of those lessons you've got to learn for yourself. If somebody even had told me that many years ago, I'm not sure I would have taken it to heart, but certainly there now. Well, Ben, this has been a lot of fun conversation for sure. I guess for any of the listeners who might have questions about some of the things we talked about today, or wants to learn more about rodeo, where are the best places for them to go?
Sure. You can reach out to me through LinkedIn or Twitter. My Twitter username is skinny and bald because I'm kind of skinny, kind of bald, pretty bald today. Videos showing. And or you can find me on LinkedIn under Ben Fisher. Our website is Hey Rodeo, HEY period rodeo, RODEO. And you can, if you're interested in learning more, you can request a demo there. But yeah, welcome to reach out to me directly through LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm around. And yeah, happy to connect with everyone.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again for the time today, and best of luck to you guys.
Thank you.